So welcome everyone to our NRW Q&A session. Firstly, I'd like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri people of the land that I'm on today in the beautiful Alphington Fairfield region. I went for a walk this morning and the birds were, chirping, and we've got a beautiful, I know where most of us are in COVID, but we've got a beautiful day out there and we're very lucky to be on the lands. Myself be on the lands of the Wurundjeri people, but also I'd like to acknowledge the lands that you all are on today too. We have some amazing speakers here today. We're very, very fortunate. Today's presentation is about more than a word and taking action in Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander mental health. I have some amazing speakers. Firstly, I'd like to introduce you to Joe Williams. Joe is a Wurundjeri Aboriginal Mayan, born in Corowa, raised in Wagga. My family's up in Griffith, so I know those areas, Joe. Joe's played rugby for rugby league for Sydney Rabbitohs, Penrith and the Canterbury Bulldogs. Also switching a career to professional boxing, which is, amazing thing to do. While experiencing all that, obviously Joe will go into a bit more detail, was suffering with mental ill health as well. We also have Belinda Duarte, Darjarung Wajabolok, descendant woman with also Polish background. So thank you for that too. CEO of Culture is Life, and has worked done amazing things in the education space, especially with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in the trainee sector and sports. I've known Belinda for many, many years, starting with the Carew Business Network, where you came and spoke to a group of young Aboriginal people around your track and field experience and where you can go in sport. So thanks, Belle, for coming today as well. And then AJ Williams at the top of the screen, or my screen, I should say, who we've been very, very lucky to have had cultural awareness training with him this week. And those who experienced that would really understand the heartfelt stories that were told, but also the knowledge he shared with us as practitioners in the mental health space. Wajabolok man as well, and Wurundjeri descendant, runs your own business and mental health social worker, but also mental health nurse, and has huge experience to share with our team around how we can work better with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander clients, but not just community, but also any client that works with us with in mind. And thank you so much for your support and to coming online today. So I might, this is an open discussion, so please drop your Q&A questions into the Q&A box. But I might start with Joe just to introduce yourself. And sorry, Belinda, you got a question there?
Oh no, I actually decided been asked to
oh, we've flipped it. We've done some coin tossing. Three-way coin, and Belinda is our first person who's going to talk about her knowledge in this space and what you've been doing.
Sure, thank you. Thanks so much for that intro. I guess first I want to exhale and ask everybody that's joined us to exhale into country. I am on the lands of the Ngunnawal people, the Bunurong language group, and pay my deepest respect to elders past and present. In that acknowledgement to the Wurrung, the Wurundjeri and the Kulin Nation of Melbourne. I have been extraordinarily blessed to work in this and across this area for a long time now, and I want to take that moment to acknowledge the elders and amazing people that have been there to support and guide me through some of the work that I've been able to do, not only for our mob, but just for my family in the mix of being here. So if you haven't and you don't know the country that you live on, for one action, a very minimal action should be that everybody does know that. So I guess we've each been sort of asked to give a bit of a personal context about the story. Mute. Justine, you're on mute.
AJ, could you please mute while we're not talking, we'll have to have each presenter muting that's not speaking. Perfect, thank you.
Sure, sorry. anyway, to go back, just to give a bit of a personal context. So a bit about my background. I was born and raised on Wurundjeri country in Ballarat, and family-wise, my matriarch country is Wotjobaluk country. So AJ and I have got that mob and clan connection up on the same country, which is with the Wimmera. Sort of, if anybody knows Victoria, we look at the sort of group connected to Gary Word, Halls Gap, all the way up to Mill. Our native title claim covers that as a collective group of clans up that way. Judgerun country is central Victoria in the Bendigo area and around through to Dalesford, Creswick, and up further, a little bit further away through my great-grandfather's country. And my beautiful father is, I don't like saying was because he's around for me. He was born in a concentration camp in Germany, and Polish family over there, and was lucky enough many years later to be the first member of our Australian family to go back and reconnect with my family on that side. Not that long ago, actually, which is a whole other story to tell. But today, I guess, what I wanted to pick up on from a personal perspective was just to talk about how critical it is to think about, you know, self-reflection in healing and in modelling the best wellbeing practices is for us as individuals or professionals to take the steps ourselves and really think about modelling one, the sort of journey that each of us is taking in a way in which helps not only us grow, but models to the people around us on how to navigate the complexities of well-being and trauma, mental health challenges, and I guess what are the origins of that? And I'm not going to talk too much about trauma-informed approaches, but I do want to talk about trauma and how that affects the well-being, particularly for our people as First Nations people, and how critical it is to understand that journey and the impacts of us from a generational perspective. So, you know, the more I understand who I am of, the more informed I am about what I was exposed to in my childhood. It gives me perspective on what both of my parents were recovering from and continue to recover. And also it allows me an opportunity to, by raising that conscious awareness, consider how I choose to heal it. So I want to acknowledge my beautiful family, because without them, I am nothing. Without them, I'm nothing. You know, they have been critical in shaping where I've invested my life work. For all of the good, the bad, the ugly, and the beautiful. So my beautiful mum at the age of 4 was placed into the Ballarat orphanage. And with my auntie, her brother was also removed and placed into foster care. And to cut a long story short, a number of times my great-grandmother, my great BAP, she tried to get her grandchildren out of that orphanage because of the government policies that were in place around keeping and assimilating children of our people into society. They were not released until they were of age to leave the orphanage in their own right. That had significant costs for us as a family, and for every Aboriginal family. When you think of the history of missions, reserves, stolen generation, the impact on that, on knowing who you are of as a peoples, and what are the cultural practices in place. And as another uncle of my family calls me the nosy magpie, I have had this obsession with understanding where there's been big gaps of connection, of knowledge about who we are as not only a family but as a peoples, across both sides of my family. Not knowing certain members that existed, what was the story of our people, and what was the cost of the actions that we are living and breathing today. The work around restorative language processes that, you know, our people with the Gaia Language Reconstruction Project a number of years ago, and that work and how that affects your well-being. You know, there's multiple ways in which, although our families are filled with grief and loss, the generational trauma of massacres, to learn and know our family here because a child that was the sole survivor of a massacre, and the person who massacred the whole family took that child and grew him up, and his name was Hammond. And thinking through the impact of that on families, and because of that young child's resilience, ensured that we recovered as a people. And there's multiple stories about that. So I tell that story as one. And what I'm excited about is the willingness for people to really talk to truth and what that means for us over these next few years in Victoria. We're in a place looking at truth telling and what that means in our healing and recovery. And it sounds big picture, but it starts with people, individuals, family units, communities. And, you know, in my pursuit to understand the truth of our families, and that's included my Polish family, displacement, connection and belonging, cultural isolation, acts of violence. You know, we've been challenged with, you know, when my babcha was in a concentration camp, when did she fall pregnant? Did she fall pregnant in that camp? Or did she fall pregnant before and then ended up in the camp? A lot of question marks there that we're working through to try and clarify. And it might not be the best answer, but it'll be the truth. And so this pursuit of dealing with my beautiful family's extraordinary resilience and defiance, and some of the critical things that kept them going were sport, work, and this absolute fierce commitment to keeping family together, because both sides of the family were torn apart. And on reflection, growing up as an adult, I recognised the mental health issues that would evolve, all the spiritual well-being issues that were crying out. And you know it in your body as a child, but you don't necessarily understand it. So to fast track to today, and because I've only got an hour, so I'm going to just be very distinct. The work that we do at Cultures Life is looking at investing in work that looks around culture and how critical those cultural pieces are to the fabric of our identity. Research shows, you know, we can do all the work on social determinants, look at employment, look at education and training, look at stable housing, but if you do not deal with cultural determinants, which was ripped out, destroyed in a whole range of ways, or attempted to be destroyed, I should say, that our communities will continue to be unwell. I deeply believe that this country can't be well unless all of us sit with this. Non-Aboriginal people are currently unwell when they consider the context of this country, its history, its origins. The resurgence comes up last year, huge year, with the, visibility globally around Black Lives Matters, with Aboriginal Lives Matters, with the amount of young kids we've got in custody and in lockup, with the amount of suicides, the incidence of self-harm and mental health. We know the stats, but dealing with the origins are critical. And as non-Aboriginal people working in service area, how do you create safe places? One, you've got to address the barriers and ensure that Aboriginal people are leading with the solutions, whether that's having people employed, whether that's collaborating and co-designing work with Aboriginal organisations. But fundamentally, as individuals, none of this matters unless you make the commitment to connecting here. This, we know. There's been multiple royal commissions, evidence coming out of everywhere. Until we sit with the emotions as a country and work through that and connect deeply with one of the most, I feel unbelievably blessed to be a First Nations woman, because I was taught something else and now I'm blowing. Over the years, I've just learnt more about who I am of. It's not about me, it's who I am of. The oldest living culture in the world. And as a nation, when we truly connect and celebrate that, that will transform our identity as a people. And our connection to place and country will shift. The healing will commence around the origins of who we all are, because there's history on all of our backgrounds and what's sitting in our hearts and minds. But that was a little bit about me. And, I think I've done my 15 minutes because we got on a little bit late. So thank you. I'll hand it over. Joe, did you want to go next?
Yeah, I'm happy. I'm happy to be. Just to thank you so much for that raw, deep, but honest account of who you are, but also who you are of and where you are from. As challenging as it is to hear sometimes for people, for non-Indigenous people, you might hear it once a year during Reconciliation Week, on NAIDOC Week, or we live it every day. We live the constant questions, the constant chatter that's in here, that goes on inside our head, of actually not knowing who we are. So I think the next time you see someone, hear someone, because we will, you'll soon learn about me is that I'm a bit of a straight talker around this sort of stuff. You will see someone, you will hear someone, because we're not yet at a place in this country where we are all understanding. So the next time you see someone or hear someone, you make sure you remind them that we live this every day. We live this as the first people, not knowing particularly who we are. Right now, in acknowledging country of where I am and where you are, to those old people, I am like being, I am from those old people. I am a product of resilience, but I'm also a product of inherited trauma. I'm also a product of inherited behaviors that makes up who I am. And being forceful to hold a mirror up to myself, as I say, and look deep into who I am as a man, there's some confronting stuff that I've had to learn, that I've had to identify for me to be able to adjust and work on behaviors that I have. Again, behaviors that I've all learned. And I talk so strongly about behaviors because what we know is that when we talk about trauma, a lot of people's perspective of trauma is this unwanting spell that's been cast over us. When we look at it, trauma is a product, behaviors are a product of trauma. and we look at what behaviors we have, every single person, there's loads and loads and loads of research now around the first 1,000 days. The first 1,000 days of a young person in the womb, and then 2 years on this side of the earth. So a lot of what I do now is learning about that. And I guess how I come to that, I was lucky enough to be a kid that was raised and loved and looked after with dreams to be a footballer, dreams to be a sports person, because my dad did that, my older brother did that. So everything that I saw, I wanted to be. And I was lucky enough to be signed in the NRL from a young age. 13, I signed my first contract in the NRL. No, I didn't move down to play footy at that point. I was growing up in Wagga at the time. 13-year-old, signed my first contract, and then with the vision or the steps put in place to be an NRL player. You look at then as a 17-year-old to go down and move down to the big smoke was a challenging thing, but as an Aboriginal kid, being off country, not knowing particularly a great deal about who I was. Now, when I look at identity, yes, I knew that I was Aboriginal all my life, but I was too black to be white and too white to be black. I didn't really fit in either world. So many people struggle with that, particularly First Nation people, because we talk about this identity and we think that identity is what we look like. For me, my identity has been many things. Firstly, as a Wiradjuri Woggaloo man, but then as a rugby league player. But then when I finished playing in the rugby league, I went to boxing, and now I work in the mental health space. And then with that transition in the last 18 months to 2 years into more specializing in trauma behaviors and how to recover those sort of things. I won't get into and won't dive into who I am and what I was as a sports person. That's readily available on YouTube or anything like that. I guess today, talking about the work that I do is a product of who we were as people, who we are as people, and with a vision of who we want to become as people. And for me, long story short, I struggle with suicidal ideation from a young age, around the age of 13 as well, on the back of some concussions. And there's an article that'll be in the Telegraph this weekend about the significance of what it is that I struggle with, talking about memory loss, talking about having recently had to relive the death of a friend who died 12 months ago that I didn't realize. And then when the anniversary of that come up on social media, it was like I relived that death all over again because I didn't remember the first time. That's a very real reality for someone like me. So when we've got people questioning the effects of concussions, the effects of head trauma and brain trauma, people who sign checks that impact on what happens to people when it comes to what happens to our head, I'm a living product of that. I'm not interested if people want to say yes or no, does it happen, because I'm a living product of it. I forget to pick up my kids from school some days. I didn't remember my daughter being born. I didn't even know who she was. 3 days old, I couldn't even remember her name. So the impacts of that, what it has on my head, has significant impacts on my well-being. And on the back of those concussions, set about some dialogue that told me I was worthless, that I would never amount to anything, and that I should end my life. I've struggled with that for a long time in my life. I had through periods of addiction, alcohol and drugs, then getting sober, moving into a boxing career, down a path which led me to suicide attempts, psych ward facility stays, numerous medications, services that try and fix me. And if I'm honest, the biggest healing for me as an Aboriginal man has been connecting to the roots of who I am. No amount of medication can give me that. No amount of Western psychology can give me the essence of who I am spiritually. I don't think it's there. I've just contributed to a social work textbook, which the chapter I co-wrote was mental health as spiritual health, because on the back of conversations with some elders that I'm close with, he said, you're not mentally ill. I don't care what the doctors tell you. You're spiritually ill. When you heal your spirit, you'll get well. And another elder said to me, what you do and what you learn when you're out on country, sitting and listening to elders and listening with the cultural practice of who you are and who we've always been as Aboriginal people, the more you connect to that, all your mental health problems will disappear. 7 or 8 years down the track, I know that's my biggest healer. I'm diagnosed with bipolar disorder, with suicidal ideation constantly every day. But when I'm well, I don't look for medication. I've got to get back out into the bush, because it's them old people who will fix me. It's them old people sitting with the land of who I am. And as that old fella said, you're not mentally ill, you're spiritually ill. As soon as you heal your spirit, you'll get well. And you can't do that sitting inside 4 walls. I recently lectured at UOW to a bunch of med students, talking about going out into Aboriginal communities. And I said, don't think that you'll fix Aboriginal people with your prescription pad, because a hell of a lot of Aboriginal people are spiritually not well, and how they get fixed is by learning about who they are and looking at and addressing some of those challenges that we face as First Nation people that have been brought in by the process of colonization. You know, I have a real challenge with, I'm a doer. You know, I won't say certain things without actually trying to implement what should or needs to be done in my life, in how I get well. For a long time, and this can be controversial, but I'll say it because I'm a straight shooter and that's what Spirit's telling me to say right now, is that I was blaming of colonization and the process of, for a hell of a long time, for a lot of what's happened in our communities, which is 100% truth. But we can't sit and blame what is happening in our communities without looking to address it. How we do that is by holding a mirror up to ourselves and having a look at some of the inherited behaviours that we've taken on, which has been to a process of introduce things into the Aboriginal way of life. And again, we're struggling to walk between 2 worlds. You look at Aboriginal people right across the country, and we are strong in one world and not the other. And depending on where you are with the location-wise, will depend on how strong you are in the one particular world. There's communities they're extremely strong in the traditional world that have only been colonized in the last few generations, but struggle in the new modern world of what we live today. And then there's a lot of us mob on the East Coast who aren't particularly strong with our identity and the cultural practice and the ceremonial practice that was ripped away from us. But we're strong in the white world, right? So it's finding a balance to walk between 2 worlds. When I look at the damage that has happened in our communities, we are a living product of the traumas that we have inherited, the behaviors that we have seen, had modeled to us, and then had normalized in the first 1,000 days of our lives. Who we are as people now, we need to look at ourselves in the mirror and say, I won't ever blame what happened back there to me if I can fix it now. So let's hold the mirror to ourselves in each community and facilitate healing from an Aboriginal perspective. Let's look at facilitating healing the old ways. The old ways we do it is through connecting to each other, connecting to country, and connect them to the three P's: people, purpose, and place. When we connect to people, we have community. When we connect to a purpose, we have hope. When we connect to the place, we have identity of who we are. Identity isn't what we look like. Our identity is the behaviors that we keep every single day. So I encourage people, if you are in your workforce, don't think that you can fix people in a prescription pad or in Western methods. They may help in helping you to identify different things, but don't think that you can fix people by Western methods. We need to look at fixing our communities by learning about who we are. The only way we learn about who we are is connect to those three things: people, purpose, and place. Connecting to people gives us a community. Connecting to a purpose gives us hope. Connecting to the place shapes and forms our identity. That's me.
Thank you, Joe. AJ, I'll hand it over to yourself because I'm sure you have lots to offer from your experience in the health industry. So thank you.
Yeah. Hi, guys. Just want to thank Joe and Belinda for sharing their stories with us today. Before I do start, I just want to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that I'm on. I'm here in Balwyn Kew in Melbourne on the land of the Wurundjeri people. I pay respect to their elders past, present and emerging. And I extend that to the lands where you're currently on as well and pay respect to their elders past, present and emerging. I'm AJ Williams. My background's Wiradjuri and Watchabullocks. My family come from Dimbulla Horsham and Dubbo Wellington area of New South Wales. A little bit about me. My first qualification was as a nurse, and I fell into nursing by accident. And people often go, how do you fall into nursing by accident? I was living on the streets in Sydney in a place called Belmore when I was 17. I lived in a squat opposite the hospital. And the guys I was squatting with came back to the squat and said, we've got jobs as orderlies at the hospital. We're moving into nurses' quarters. Do you want to come? And I thought, being a 17-year-old boy, the nurses' quarters sound like a pretty nice place to live. So I went, yeah, how do we arrange this? I always say I borrowed clothes from the Salvation Army, but I didn't return them. So I don't know if I can still claim borrowed. But I got all dressed up, went to my job interview. And while I was being interviewed, the matron, oh, look, you can see how old I am now. The matron that was sitting on the panel just kind of looked at me and actually stopped the interview and said, look, someone's put out of a nursing program. Do you want to become a nurse? And you can start tomorrow. So my whole lifelong ambition to be a nurse, like I was given 33 seconds to make a decision. I kind of said, yep. And within 3 days, I'd moved into the nurses' quarters and I started my life as being a nurse. So I actually stayed there for 3 years, finished the Everlast-based hospital nursing-based system in New South Wales, specialised in maternal health and mental health. I've gone on to become a social worker. So I'm a mental health accredited social worker. I did my Bachelor and Master of Social Work. I'm also a youth worker and a community development worker as well. But I'm also part of the stolen generation as well. So if I just a little bit of a summary, because I've got to give the short version of my story, not the long version, because you'll be here till like this afternoon. But I've got to narrow it down to like another 10 minutes. But if I go back to my great-grandmother and my grandmother, they actually were on Ebenezer Mission up in up towards Dimbulla Horsham way. And my grandmother, my great-grandmother, when my grandmother was about 6, well, actually my great-grandmother, she was living on the property and she was on the mission, and a lot of white fellas came to the mission to do work, and they often got paid to work on the property. And part of their payment was also to choose which Aboriginal girl they want to have sex with at night. And that's exactly how my grandmother was conceived. My grandmother lived on the property, on the mission, until she was about 8, until one day the government cars came in and they took her away from my grandmother, my great-grandmother. And she was placed in Cootamundra Girls' Home, where she was trained to be a domestic servant. And she was placed on a property outside of Gunnedah in New South Wales. Her story is very similar. On the property where my grandmother actually had to work as a domestic worker, she met my grandfather, who was a non-Indigenous man that came to do work on the property, and he got to choose which Aboriginal girl that he wanted to have sex with at night, and he chose my grandmother. And he came to the property many times and actually had relationships with my grandmother. And we actually, you know, it's been romanticized in the family that she ran off and married my grandfather, and that's how they their life started to begin. But only a couple of years ago, that my auntie gave me a piece of paper, and the piece of paper was the receipt that my grandfather paid the landowner in order to get her, because at the time, under the local laws, she was the property of the landowner. And in any way for my grandfather to actually marry her was to actually buy her. My uncles and aunties will tell me that like he had to use that like a transaction in order to marry her. He was in love with her, and he actually refused to allow her to do any more cooking and cleaning after he married her, because he said that's not what you're born for. But then they had 6 kids, and my grandmother died at 34 of cancer, and my grandfather died not long after that. And despite the fact that my grandmother had 12 or 13 brothers and sisters, all those kids got put into state care as well. So 2 of my uncles went to foster homes for the Salvation Army. 2 of my uncles got adopted into non-Indigenous families. But my mum was still old enough to go back to Cootamundra Girls' Home, where she was trained to be a domestic servant, and she herself was placed on the property. My mum gave birth to me when she was just before her 15th birthday. And it wasn't long after I was born that my mum got pregnant with my brother. And there was lots of complications with this pregnancy, and mum couldn't mum couldn't really manage being a 16-year-old woman with like pregnant and a kid. And circumstances made her become on the streets, and we were taken in by, in New South Wales, in Redfern actually, we were taken in by an Aboriginal family in Redfern, and they actually could see that mum, who was pregnant at the time, was quite traumatized and quite the baby was quite distressed. So they took my mum to a hospital. And for whatever reason, at that particular moment in time, child protection was called, because they deemed that the young kid that was with my mum could no longer stay with my mum. And mum was in hospital anyway. And the woman that picked us off the streets could not look after us, because could not look after that kid, because the kid was not hers. The kid was the product of a mixed blood, is what it says on the court report. And that kid got put into foster care. And my mum gave birth to my brother in the early 8th month of pregnancy. And while my mum was in hospital, the doctor, nurse, social worker, and a police officer came to my mum with a death certificate and told her that her child has died in care. If you haven't worked out who I'm talking about me. My mum was told that I had died in care. And for the first 14 years of my life, I grew up believing that my mum died in childbirth with my brother, and my dad could no longer be located, because that was the official story. And that was the story that was on every court report growing up. I always grew up knowing I was an Aboriginal kid. It was on every, as I said, it was on every court report. Every school I went to knew, you know, AJ, the Aboriginal kid. Going from what Joe said, you know, I copped a bit of bullying at school. I wasn't white enough to be a white kid from some of my friends, but then I wasn't black enough to be sometimes with the Aboriginal kids either. But when I was 14, I had already been adopted into a family, and this is where things started to kind of unravel. And when we talk a bit about how the government did things and why they did things, when I was 14, we still had child protection in my adoptive family's life, and I started a child protection worker. And to be honest with you, I don't think child protection's changed a lot in the last 30 years. There's always a new protection worker that turns up every 3 months wanting to help. And one day I got a new child protection worker that came to my school. And this child protection worker out of nowhere started talking about family reunification, and you and your brothers and your mum are all getting back together. And I kind of don't remember much of more of the conversation. I kind of went home and had some sort of psychotic episode, I reckon, because it was a few days later that my adoptive parents were back at the school going, what the hell has just happened? And they called child protection back in, and, you know, this time they never denied they told me the story. They just said, look, sorry, wrong kid. And they went back to the fact that my mum died in childbirth and my brother. But there was a payoff, not a payout, a payoff. And the payoff is that some of the year 10 and 11 students were going to America, and I was only in year 8. And child protection was paying for one or two of the kids to go. And there was a decision made that maybe we could pay for AJ to go as well, with a parent or another teacher. So any kid that's grown up in care, Disneyland's the place you want to go. So I was definitely wanting to go, and I begged and begged and begged to let me go. And finally everyone kind of agreed. But what do I need to leave the country? Well, it's a passport. And because there was a court order on me at that particular moment in time, my adoptive parents weren't allowed to apply for my passport. The government applied for my passport. And when my passport arrived, I didn't give a shit what was on the passport. I was going to America. But when I handed my passport to my principal at the school, the principal kind of noticed something that was quite weird, and that was the date of birth on my passport didn't match the date of birth on any of the court records that were in existence. Didn't even match my school records of when my date of birth was. In fact, my birth certificate actually and my passport actually stated that I was born 9 months before the date of birth that I had grown up with. I grew up believing I was born on the 19th of September 1972. And that's the date I celebrated my birthday until I was 14, until I found out that I was born on the 16th of November 1971, which means that the government changed my date of birth. And the only reason they would have changed my date of birth is so that my mum could no longer locate me and I could no longer locate my mum. So when people say, you know, stuff happens and it happened a long time ago, I just want to remind people that that long ago isn't as long ago as where people really think some of this stuff actually is. As a result of this, you know, from the ages, I mentioned I lived on the streets, but from the ages of 14 to 18, I was in and out of hospital quite a lot. Yes, with suicidal ideation and with an eating disorder that I was diagnosed with bulimia. So yeah, that trauma is definitely something that I've been through, that my family's been through, that I've had to actually live with. But I've been able to use what I do in my job to actually help both myself and other people in trauma. I run my own business now called Youre Consultancy, and Youre is named after my 2 kids. I've got a son called Youre, meaning goanna boy in Wiradjuri, and Gunyi, which means echidna in Wotjobaluk language, and they're the names of my kids. I do cultural awareness, I do mental health first aid workshops, I run mentoring programs for Aboriginal kids in schools, I run mentoring programs for Aboriginal workers in the workforce. I have put together a YouTube channel, which if you Google search my YouTube channel, Youre Consultancy, you'll actually see Aboriginal people. We've done interviews and podcasts with Aboriginal elders and their stories in their own words. With the 3 schools that I do work at, with permission of the parents, sorry, with permission of the parents and the school, we were able to record the kids sharing their stories of their exploration of their Aboriginality. And they're in different playlists. One's at Scott's College, one's at Campbell Grammar, one's at Woodley School. We've been able to, the kids themselves wanted to break stereotypes and facts, the questions they get asked all the time. And so I was able to locate funding for these kids so we could actually record them breaking stereotypes and facts, like giving examples of what casual racism looks like, or explain what the Aboriginal flag means. And we were able to create 27 little videos from some funding, and they're all up on the YouTube channel. During lockdown last year, we extended the YouTube channel by me calling my friends, my Aboriginal friends that work in health and education employment, and said to them, hey guys, what we want to do is actually, I want to provide tips and strategies for working with Aboriginal people. And can you send me something, even via your phone? And 23 of my Aboriginal friends actually, because that's all I've got, I only got 23, actually sent me little recordings on their phone saying things like, hi, I'm David, I'm an Aboriginal health worker, and these are my 2 tips for working with Aboriginal people. And we re-edited them, and we put them up onto YouTube. And we also, I've also got friends that are allies that are really, that have shared some significant experience working with Aboriginal communities, and I got them to do exactly the same. And so those stories were put up onto YouTube as well. So there's about 85 videos up on YouTube at the moment, with a couple of more series coming out that I've been recording and editing. And I just want to add that this week on Friday is the Heart Awards, and the Reconciliation Heart Awards, and the YouTube channel has been nominated as a finalist for the YouTube, for the awards. And if I don't win, that's not a problem. It was the fact that Aboriginal stories are starting to be heard and told by Aboriginal people, which kind of leads me into what I think reconciliation is all about. And, you know, these stories were, even for the elders that did their stories as well, it was for them also reconciling their history as well. That for a lot of Aboriginal people, our stories and our family stories have been taken from us. Our culture has been taken from us. And we're in a process now with the kids that I work with of actually reconciling that past trauma and that past history to going into a way of, if we want to continue passing this culture on to our kids, how do we learn this culture in the first place in order to be able to hand it on to the next generations? And that's a big thing, that if you watch some of the videos, the kids were actually asking that question. And it's really hard asking a 14-year-old boy, for example, when you have kids, what aspects of culture do you want to pass on to your kids if you don't actually have that to start off with? But the boys, and especially the boys in the videos, were actually quite reflective and quite emotional, going, I don't know how I'm going to do this and become an Aboriginal man when I don't know much about my culture, but this is the ways and this is the strategies that I want to learn more about it. And it's quite amazing how persistent and how dedicated and how alive these young people are in wanting to know so much about their culture, their Aboriginal culture in general, but also their own family history and their own family culture as well. So, you know, what is reconciliation? I'm just going to summarize in a couple of points that reconciliation is not a process. Sorry, it's a process, not an outcome. It's a journey. It's not a destination. It's not a final product at the end, like we've done a reconciliation action plan and thus it's finished. The action plan is a direction of what you need to do to start that process and work your way through that journey. It also means that in 2021, you know, Aboriginal people like myself, Belinda, Joe, elders in the community that your services work with, you're all put on notice basically now because we're watching you. The action for, or the wording for this year's Reconciliation Week is, you know, it's about action. We now want to see you do the talk, not and walk the walk. rather than just have these action plans kind of in place saying that we're going to be doing all these things. We're going to be watching you to make sure that you are actually doing them. But it's also about reconciling where you are in your own journey as well, in terms of understanding Aboriginal history, understanding how recent some of this Aboriginal history is, understanding some of the facts and places in history. Because if you don't understand the historical points and the historical events, even the most recent historical events, or what any of the current Aboriginal issues are at the moment, then you're not going to understand how those events actually cause trauma for contemporary Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people today. You're not able to actually link this event and how it actually does really impact on people today. In training, sometimes I'm always thrown with participants saying, but this stuff happened years ago. Why don't you people move on? Why don't you people just, surely you've had an apology from the government, get over it. And it's trying to actually understand that, we're not all over it yet, because a lot of the events, which are most things that have happened in the history, relate to the elders in our community right now, relate to people my age. The stories that we tell, that I don't sit down and say to my kids, sit down, I'm going to traumatize you by telling you my family history. But because my kids and my nephews hear the stories of us growing up, and it's told in a quite emotional way because we experienced it, this is one reason that transnational trauma is still there, because history is still being told by people that actually experienced these particular events in time. So unless you can understand Aboriginal history, then you're not going to actually know where that trauma has actually come from, let alone then try to work with it. So it is about reconciling with yourself as well. It's about learning things, unlearning things, relearning things. It's about involving yourself in those uncomfortable conversations, understanding what the terms of white privilege actually mean, and how, when we say that, you're coming from a white privileged background, that doesn't necessarily mean a negative concept. I can't blame you for where you've been born or what structures have shaped you, but you kind of need to understand that those structures are the same structures that have actually impacted on the lives of Aboriginal people today, especially in law, education, employment, health. And it's also time to actually start listening to Aboriginal stories from an Aboriginal perspective, through Aboriginal lenses, in the words of Aboriginal people. Because our stories are often being denied by us, denied of us. They've actually in the past been taken from us and re-recorded from a white perspective. It's now actually listening to the Aboriginal stories in an Aboriginal context. And to do that, that's the beginning of reconciliation, is where I'm at the moment. So that's all I've got to say, guys. Thanks.
Thank you, AJ. It's the raw, honest truth, and to hear it from your perspective as born in the 70s, nearly, it's unbelievable to hear those stories that's still happening, and we still see it today in different ways with our young Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children. The group here today has talked around spiritual healing, trauma-informed. Just to put some context to this, Mind is a mental health provider, but we also are working on the housing packaging for people coming off the streets from COVID. 10% of those people that are through the Homes to Homes project identify as Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who've been living on the streets or couch surfing, etc. Obviously, potentially suffering with needing spiritual healing, mental health support, etc. As a conglomerate of people here with such knowledge, what can Mind do differently than just focusing on prescriptions or our general practices? What can we do better for our Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander clients?
I would suggest don't do it inside. Get out on country, and again we look at on country and what that means is to many different people. But there's a stack load of people who are off country. But I revert back to a conversation I had when I was based in the US in 2016, and there was a big event on here, a big Aboriginal corroboree event on here, and I said to one of the brothers, I wish I was there. I'm on the other side of the world. I wish I was there to connect with you. And he said, you don't need to be with us to connect to us in spirit, but also you don't need to be with us physically to be connected to Mother. Whilst you're off country, we are all still on the one Mother. So no matter where you are, who you are, being on country is about sitting with the old people. And the old people aren't just, as we would say, the old people aren't just who we are physically. It's the spirit of people around us, whether it be the spirit of them old people who have passed, or them old trees, or them old animals, or, when we talk about death, when we die, we are reborn into a different, into the same spirit, into a different thing. That's why we talk and connect so much about our totem systems, right? So why our totem is looking at the different animal systems, or what we see as in physical as animals, still have same spirit. I had a conversation with an elder when the bushfires were happening. I said, what can we do? There's the billion animals that have perished, and he said, they're just like us, mate. When they die, they return to Mother and their spirit's reborn. They may not be here in the physical, but their spirit keeps going. So when we look at healing our spirit, we need to connect with them old people. When we connect with them old people, and it's worked for me too many times to question it. I've been, as I said, I struggle with constant suicidal ideation. So for me, I've been in my car driving out the road, looking not whether I'd know I'd come back on. It works for me too many times to question. So if it works for me, it can work for all Aboriginal people. And again, you look at the white science of it now. They call it earthing, right? Our people have been earthing for thousands and thousands of years because we just didn't walk with shoes on. Like, you look at our old practices and what they were and how they've always been. There is so much healing in what we do. Culture isn't just about dancing around a fire or playing an instrument. Culture is about stories, and all of those stories have deeply embedded values in those stories. No matter who you are, where you're from, the country you are on, you will have a story. A story for what? A story for why? Connect to those stories. There is so much healing in our stories because of the values associated with the stories. Not because of how the birds got their colors. Oh, wow, that sounds beautiful. No, how the birds got their colors was a story about birds helping each other. Tiddalik the frog was a story about a frog being punished for being selfish. All of these stories have values that are connected to our behaviors. Our behaviors are our identity of who we are. In healing, I talk everywhere we go. Just connect to the stories. No matter who you are. I go to communities, I don't teach them about culture. I ask them to teach me their stories, and then I say how we can heal through their stories.
Thanks, Joe. And Belinda, did you have something to add to that? Yeah.
I guess first of all, I want to acknowledge. I just want to acknowledge the vulnerability of our men. If I was to want to see more, it's about the vulnerability not only of our men but also of men generally. So to talk to your lives and constantly being generous. I've known AJ but not known the intimacy of that story, which shatters my heart for him. as a beautiful Watchabalik man, but it's very connected from a family perspective in hearing that too. And Joe has spent years constantly gifting his knowledge and wisdom, because more than anything, he just wants to see our people thrive. And I think, you know, I can't type. I've tried to type and it's not picking up any answers. So hence my words, and I'll make it short. But, you know, if there's one thing, our people are a collective people, and there is the deepest, generous love that supersedes the selfishness of individuality, that again and again and again, I just fall in love with our cultural practices in their similarities and in their diversities from country to country, because ultimately there's such a giving nature when our people are well. And there's always a place for you to belong. And yet, how does the generosity and grace of our elders, of our communities, of our ancestors before us continue to rise to the top and call from the essence of their heart to the nation and say, please see us, be with us, love us, you know. And there's the practical things. I always go, what do I do? Fundamentally, you need to find your connection. You need to sit with the discomfort and understand why you're uncomfortable, if there is, whatever the emotions that come up. But our people are a relational people, you know. Spend time with our mob. Place, community and settings. What place? Where are you? What's the community there? TOs, traditional owners, and community members, Aboriginal people, TI people in that community living. They might, obviously, huge percentage of our people live off country. And what settings are you in? You know, you're in the mental health space here as an organisation. And what level of settings? Is it local, state, national? And how are you going to play in that setting and make a commitment? Because, you know, I have the blessing of a deep, resilient peoples that are from another country, that in that country they talk openly about the genocide. They talk and speak to the slavery, stolen wages, all of that. The one gift as individuals and a collective you can make is make a lifelong commitment to honouring the lives that you have been gifted from your ancestry on the backs of some of the most horrific acts of humanity here in this country. Just be human enough to make that lifelong connection, to be curious, inquisitive, open, and sit with the emotion of it. That'll do me. I'll breathe.
Thank you for your power, is all I can say. Your strength as a woman and as an Aboriginal woman and a Polish woman, I acknowledge that as well. I have to very much thank the panelists for their time today. The generosity that you've shared, your personal stories, your family stories, are absolutely incredible. For the mine staff that are on the line and our consumers and our carers that potentially are on the line, reconciliation is about learning, and this is the perfect week. We should be doing this every single day of our lives in Australia, that every single person should be learning this. But if you're wanting to know some practical tips to where to go to learn reconciliation, I would be looking at National Reconciliation Australia's website. They've got a Share Our Pride, really quick snapshot of what's happened in our history. Right now today, you can be watching NITV, you can be jumping on ABC or SBS. There are so many videos and stories to be shared around what's happened in our culture as Australia. AJ has shared his YouTube channel. He's mentioned the ambassadors and the Aboriginal people who have shared their stories in the mental health space. I would be jumping on that channel, and if AJ is happy enough, we'd love to add that to our intranet site. You know, just go and talk to people. Don't be scared. As a non-Indigenous woman, I have never been scared to talk to people and ask questions, and I've been slapped down many of times for asking the wrong thing, but I learn every time I do that. And I've met some beautiful friends and I'd say family because of that as well. Thank you very much to our panelists. I know people, it's been a really great session, and we'd love to invite you back into the Mind family and to work with you again and to really understand what we should be doing differently. Thank you
Thanks.
again.
Yeah, no, thank you. And because I can't type, if you could share the details of some of our campaign work that we've done at Cultures, like to the education resources that we've got, that would be awesome.
Fantastic resources you've got there, especially in the education with your children at the moment. That's the biggest thing that anyone can do, is teach your children about Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander culture. And Belinda's got some excellent resources there. Sorry, AJ, did you want to say something?
For the first time in my life, I'm speechless.
Joe?
I put in the thread my YouTube channel as well, where I put Joe Williams TEWTV, where I put out weekly topics, weekly uncomfortable topics, just opening perspective to different things as well.
I heard you for 4 hours, so the other day. So thank you. Thank you. I'll conclude.
No, good.
Thanks. Thanks, everyone.